Erik, Chapter 30. Thus ends the story of the most dramatic portion of my life. I think one final chapter will suffice to bring us up to date. Raoul rose to the occasion that dreadful night, despite his grief. He dealt with the police as they investigated the scene of the fatal accident. I was astonished to hear him standing up for me to the police, insisting that I should only be forced to tell the difficult story once. I refrained from accusing Meg of deliberately firing the gun. My allowing her and Antoinette to escape was all the reward they will ever see for their devotion to me. I insisted that Raoul and Gustave come stay at my house until the police had finished with their investigation and given them permission to leave the country. My house finally experienced the sounds of life that a child brings, although they were sadly muted by Gustave's own grief. Gustave spent a couple of days crying in the room I had hastily fixed up for him. My study, not the still black spattered third bedroom. Raoul put his own sadness aside and had a few heart-to-heart talks with him to try to help him through it, but his interventions did not seem to be having an effect. I offered to try to speak to him, although I wasn't sure if it was my place or if it would even help. Raoul shrugged and curtly agreed that it couldn't hurt. I left him sitting on the settee in the parlor, with deep lines of exhaustion etched into his brow. As I mounted the stairs, I wondered how I would broach this subject with Gustave. Suddenly inspired, I grabbed the stuffed monkey from my own bedroom and took it into Gustave's room with me. It was probably too childish a toy for him, but I'd have it if I needed it. As I entered, the drapes were closed, keeping the room in blackness. I noted this sign of our shared preferences, but thought I could let in a sliver of light without making either of us too uncomfortable. I swagged one side of the heavy fabric back, creating a golden pathway of afternoon sunshine across the floor to the door. Dust motes sparkled in the beam of sunlight, making me think briefly of otherworldly entities. Suddenly, I wondered if Christine might be watching us from somewhere. I closed my eyes against the surge of pain brought on by this thought. Gustave's makeshift cot beside my desk still lay in shadow. I sat down on the edge of it, and he shifted where he was curled under the covers, turned toward the wall. "Gustave?" I inquired tentatively. An answering mumble came from beneath the blanket. "I want you to know that the Vicomte and I are both here to help you through this. You don't have to go through it alone. And we don't want to go through it alone either, so we would love to have you talk with us as soon as you're ready." Continued silence greeted these remarks. I pressed on, seizing on the toy monkey. "I haven't had a child over to stay before, so I don't have much here in the way of toys or amusements. A few years ago I thought I would be having a child of my own, but something went wrong. I purchased this toy for him or her, but they never got to see it. I found that it made me feel a little bit happier to have something to hug when I was so sad then. So I thought I might lend it to you if you wanted it." Gustave took the toy politely and set it carefully on the pillow beside him. He didn't seem too excited about having it there, but I didn't know if that might change once I left the room. He withdrew his hand under the blanket and turned to face me.
"So, that would have made your child my half-brother or sister? If it's true that you are my father?"
"Your mother was fairly certain that I am," I replied, almost shyly. "And the more I get to know you, the more I see myself in you."
"But I thought,"
he said, suddenly confused,
that deformed people always had deformed children."
He stopped suddenly and looked at me, not sure if I would consider the word deformed an insult, but not knowing what else to call me. I am not certain how it happened either, I replied. I thank God every day that you did not receive this curse. But I still see your musical ability and the skill of your hands as signs that you are mine. An odd look crossed his face. If I had to guess, I would have said he was happy to finally have found a source for some of the bits of himself that didn't seem to have come from either of his parents, while at the same time frightened at having to acknowledge that the world he had known as the young Vicomte was gone. I was just glad that he was rousing himself from his grief and talking to me. So, I continued briskly, we come to a decision now. You need to decide if you would rather live with me or go back to France with the Vicomte. I've spoken to him, and he says that you can return to being his heir if you so choose. Everything will be as it was before you came to America. Or you can stay here with me. I will teach you how to manage the carnival, and you can take it over when you are a man. I'll continue your music lessons, too, so that you can develop your skills. Perhaps one day you can join the symphony in the city the way I never could. Or, I improvised hastily, you can split the year, staying here all summer at the carnival and spending the winter in France with the Vicomte. I am certain that I speak for the Vicomte when I say we will do whatever we can to make you happy. Take a few days to decide, but don't hide in here while you do. We'll be downstairs, and we'd love for you to join us. Before I could change my mind, I gathered him swiftly into my arms, planted a kiss on the top of his head, and then stood to leave him alone with his thoughts. I deliberately left the door open as I left the room. When I passed it an hour or so later, I glanced inside and was heartened to see him sitting up in the bed, talking in a low voice to the stuffed monkey. That was very encouraging progress. I returned downstairs to the sitting room, wanting to report to Raoul what had passed between Gustave and I. But I found him asleep on the settee where I had left him. I studied his careworn face. The lines in his brow had not relaxed as he slept, and a track of a tear still glistened on his cheek. I once again revised my opinion of him, albeit grudgingly. It seemed he was just another man who did not have the ability to treat those he loved as well as they deserved. I certainly knew what that felt like. Much to Raoul's and my surprise, Gustave thought that splitting the year was his best option. He spent his adolescence traveling back and forth between New York and Paris. After a couple of years, he invited me to Paris for Christmas celebrations, an invitation which was seconded by the Vicomte. It has become an annual tradition for me to spend 2 weeks in France at the end of each year, celebrating with my unlikely family and spending our days reminiscing about the women whom we all still dearly miss. I always ensure that I bring my violin and a new song to play at the Daillé Mausoleum as Christine's Christmas gift. I wish I could say I have become an intrepid sea traveler, but that would be a gross exaggeration. Fortunately, with today's modern ships and a strict adherence to the drug regimen provided by my physician, I can keep the misery confined to only the initial day of travel. I would endure far more for those days of camaraderie with my son and his stepfather. I have grown so comfortable in their presence, and they in mine, that I do not even bother to wear my mask when I am there. It comes off when I arrive and lies forgotten on my nightstand until I am ready to depart. I've been surprised to finally be able to count Raoul as a friend. As he watched me interact with Gustave, something must have finally convinced him that I am not completely evil. I have apologized to him for the hurtful things I have done in the past, and explained as best I could why I felt them necessary at the time. That's not to say that he does not treat me with wariness still. But at least, if another mob were to form against me, I would not suspect him of leading it. He, too, decided to come clean about his past actions. It turned out that he did lift a hand to Christine once, and was astonished when she lunged for the fireplace poker and whacked him such a blow over the leg for it that he limped for a week. He never explicitly said so, but I have a notion that she told him if he tried it again, to her or Gustav, she'd leave him. It was a gutsy move for a woman who didn't even know that she could have had a safe harbor with me across the ocean. She had thought me dead at the time, and had still been willing to cut her ties with him. When Gustav was in America with me, he was an invaluable help in running my carnival. Many are the improvements that have been made at his suggestion. It fascinates me to watch him at work puzzling out how to solve a problem. It's as if I'm watching two of my own brains working together in tandem. I find myself doing as my foster father did, pushing problems in his direction just because of the energy and creativity he brings to solving them. When the Great War broke out, I suspected that America would hold back on entering the fray. Raoul was able to escape from France and lived out the duration of the war quite comfortably with Gustav and I. His manor in Normandy sustained some mortar damage, but it has since been repaired. Unfortunately, Gustav was required to report to the armed forces with the first American draft, having just turned 21 6 weeks before the draft. It was the price that had to be paid for the American portion of his dual citizenship. Luckily, Gustav's mechanical skills earned him a spot fixing tanks that was far from any fighting. I saw the physical and mental brokenness of many of the men that returned from the fighting, and I thanked heaven that his light had not been snuffed out by war. Thank God we shall never see the likes of that carnage again. The years immediately following the cessation of hostilities were both terrifying and amusing to me. Terrifying as I had read the reports from far and wide of the incurable Spanish flu sweeping the world, and wondered when it might come for me or someone I loved. Amusing as I watched hosts of people complain about having to follow the government's instructions about wearing a linen face mask to prevent the spread of the disease. I had worn a mask since the day I was born, and I had always been grateful for its protection. When I added the linen mask to the one I normally wore, I felt well nigh invisible. Once I was permitted to reopen my carnival, I hosted special days where people wearing the appropriate masks were given substantial discounts on their ticket price, and my profits soared. The years passed and Gustav matured before my eyes. When he returned to us after the war, he attracted the attention of one of the bear handler's daughters, a lovely girl named Amanda. They met one night at a staff bonfire, an event I'd thrown together to promote camaraderie among my staff. Gustav and I had been playing a duet on our violins beside the bonfire. He had his eyes closed, lost in the music, but I had mine open and saw her staring across the fire at him. I cleared my throat significantly, causing his eyes to pop open as he played. I used my own eyes and a discreet tilt of my head to direct his attention across the fire to her, where she stood swaying to the music. I watched his face redden as he realized he was the object of her scrutiny. After we finished the duet, he made an excuse and hastily packed away his violin, before sauntering across to talk to her. I watched enchantment light up both of their faces as I packed my own instrument away. After years of courtship, they were finally married last year. At last, there is a new Vicomtesse de Chagny, as Raoul has never either remarried or rescinded Gustav's birth status. Our young man is heir to a noble French title and its rebuilt fortune, as well as the largest amusement empire in New York State. Business has been excellent since the war and the pandemic ended, as an entire country tries to shake off the hangover of those years with endless summers of mad pleasure. Gustav pioneered the addition of roller coasters to the park and became an expert on their maintenance and repair. We have never had an accident with the contraptions, although I still have never plucked up the courage to ride it myself. Last year saw 2 events come to pass, the final 2 of my story. Amanda informed the family in December that July will bring a new addition to our family, my grandchild. The Christmas gift that I love already, though it hasn't yet arrived. But shortly after, my physician informed me that the cough and shortness of breath I have been unable to shake for the last little while is the result of a tumor in my lungs. The cough has quite stolen my singing voice, and now I cannot clear the gravelly tones from my speaking voice either. I didn't dare to ask the physician if I will live to see my grandchild, because I greatly fear that the answer will be no. I remain here in France as I write this last chapter, as I haven't been able to muster enough strength to undertake the journey back to America. I will never again see my Sarah's grave. I hope she understands. I managed a trip to Christine's grave a week past, but I fear I won't be able to accomplish that again, either. I wish to close by speaking directly to my son and my grandchild. Gustav, you remind me so much of your mother every time I look at you. I see her strength, her principles, and her lovely blue eyes. But most of all, I see her spirit, the spirit that saw beneath my mask and beneath my deformity to the real me trapped inside. The music that we shared a passion for runs in your veins and enriches the lives of everyone around you. Though she was not the only woman I loved, she was certainly the one I loved with my entire being. I hope that this story, which I have written for you, will show you how much I loved her. And to my grandchild, whatever you may be named, your parents are already so in love with you, as I must confess, am I. Never forget that music is a part of who you are. Don't let your music lessons, for your father promises me he'll have you in lessons as soon as possible, become a chore. Instead, consider them as stepping stones to the greatness that is your destiny. And take special note of the way your father treats those who are different from him. This kindness is the mark of a truly great man, and I hope you can find it in yourself to do the same. Completed the 30th of May, 1926. Erik.